welcome back. We'll have a look in this video at the limits that could be pointed out to globalization. Well, when I say limit, I have to qualify this a little bit. Globalization is a fact today. We can't really go back, and we can't imagine a world today that would not be globalized, that will be all about each country in its little borders and with high protectionism, etc. This is not something that is possible to go back to, and it probably has never existed either. So there is no going back, but however, there are limits to globalization that have been pointed out by organizations or economists, etc. One of the movements which has highlighted those limits is the Alter Globalization movement. It's also called the alternative globalization. And in fact, it comes this time from a French expression, altermondialisation. In English, it's also called the global justice movement. It's a social movement that does not say that we should not have globalization. It is not against globalization, but it is in favor of global cooperation and interaction. They oppose what they describe as the negative effects of the economic globalization. And they put forward human values such as the environment, such as the fight against climate change, such as economic justice, labor protection of local cultures, and peace and civil liberties, etc. So it's a movement that is not against globalization, but which would like to see another kind of globalization taking place with more social justice, more protection of the environment, etc. Within this movement, there has been a few important events and a few important dates. Let's have a look at two of those movements, dates and sub-movements. The first very important date concerning the Alter Globalization movement is what was called the Battle of Seattle. It took place in 1999 during a WTO conference. During this WTO conference, many protesters took to the street and they demonstrated against the values promoted by the WTO. And these demonstrations, which happened in Seattle, in Washington State, in the US, these demonstrations ended up quite violent, and they took a huge scale. There were about 40,000 demonstrators there, and it was the first massive demonstration against this type of economic globalization. So it has remained in history. It has been called the Battle of Seattle because there was a very violent riots and confrontation between the demonstrators and the police forces. So it is very important to remember in the movement of the global justice, in the movement for global justice, this Battle of Seattle was a very important date. More recently, this global justice movement has taken other forms. One of them dates back to 2011, and it's called the Occupy Wall Street movement, OWS. This movement began in September 2011 in a local park, a very small park next to Wall Street in New York. Wall Street, is where the stock exchange is located in New York City. So in the financial district of New York City. The main issues raised by the Occupy Wall Street movement is the fact that in the US, but also around the developed countries around the world, there is more and more economic and social inequalities. There is more and more greed, more and more corruption, and the influence of corporations on government is also denounced by this Occupy Wall Street movement. The omnipresence of the financial sector in the economy is also denounced by Occupy Wall Street. Of course, this comes in the wake of the 2008 global financial crisis due to the so-called subprime crisis that started in the USA. And, of course, the Occupy Wall Street movement also denounces the fact that the American government, but also other governments in other countries, especially in the European Union, helped the banks, the very same banks that almost created a disaster and created, in fact, the biggest financial crisis in history. Well, these banks were in return helped by the government, that is to say, funded by the government, in order not to collapse totally and in order to make the financial system survive. So that is what Occupy Wall Street is denouncing, the fact that the governments have come to help the financial sector, and the fact that the economic system is ruled by finance nowadays, and there's little room for labor protection, for the human part of all this. So Occupy Wall Street has then spread this movement all around the world, and there are many other Occupy movements. Okay, Occupy London. In each capital, or even in smaller towns, there has been Occupy movements. Okay, so this has spread around the world. Related movements are the movements in Spain of the Indignados, for example, or the Mouvement des Indignés in France as well. These are related movements. They all have the same slogan, which is "We are the 99%." That is to say, the 1% of the population that has most of the wealth is in fact a minority, 1%. We, as the 99% remaining, should have the power to have more equality in the distribution of wealth in our societies. So that is what the Occupy movement is fighting for. If we have a look at and if we stay in this idea of the financial aspect of globalization, you have to also know about what is called the Tobin tax. The Tobin tax was suggested by the Nobel Prize in Economic Science laureate James Tobin, and who mentioned and who suggested that financial transactions around the world should be taxed to the level of 0.5%, for example. That's what he suggested, in order to dissuade, to deter speculators, and in order to have revenues for countries, in order for countries to make money out of those widespread financial transactions. This is not a reality. This Tobin tax does not exist yet, but many politicians and many economists have called for this kind of tax in order to limit speculation and to put, limits to financial transactions and to bring revenues to the governments of the world. Because nowadays the economy is mostly centered on financial transactions. In France and around the world, this has given rise to organizations such as ATTAC, Association pour la taxation des transactions financières et pour l'action citoyenne. It is an activist organization created in France in order to promote the establishment of a tax on financial exchanges and financial transactions. On the other hand, and if we have a look at the agricultural sector, for example, we are going out of the financial sector to go to the agricultural sector. There has been projects implemented such as fair trade. Fair trade is an organized social movement that has been created in order to help producers in developing countries to make better trading conditions and to sell their products at a more fair price. And this has been done in order to promote sustainability as well, and to promote the protection of the environment. So fair trade means that producers of cocoa, of bananas, of coffee, for example, sugar, are not exploited by middlemen and can have a decent wage. Of course, this has been directed towards developing countries that have been historically exploited in the colonial times, but also today by developed countries which were buying their raw materials at a very low price. So fair trade is also a movement that is there to counterbalance the effects of globalization or the economic and financial dimension of globalization. Now, here are a few questions that you need to ask yourself. My presentation of globalization was very brief. You need to go into more details. You need to read articles. You need to watch videos, documentaries, etc., to make your own opinion and to be able to give specific examples on different aspects of globalization. To finish, here's a list of questions that you should ask yourselves in order to start developing arguments concerning globalization. First question: who benefits from globalization? Is it the North? Is it the South? Is it the developed countries? Is it the developing countries? Is globalization all good? Is globalization all bad? Okay, this is another question. Another interesting question is globalization the equivalent of westernization and or of Americanization? That means, is globalization at the origin of a kind of uniformization of cultural tastes, habits, etc. around the world? This is also a very interesting question to ask, which has a more cultural aspect. Is globalization a danger for the environment? This is also a very important question. How dangerous for the developed world are the emerging giants such as China or India? What are the advantages and the drawbacks of outsourcing and relocations? Free trade or fair trade? What should the world choose? Last question, but there are many other questions that you can ask yourself. I just have to limit myself to a few questions here. Last question: what does a globalized world mean for the individual? The migrations, for example. Where do the migrants come from? Where do they go? Brain drain, working conditions, speaking foreign languages, etc., working abroad. All this globalization has also an impact on individual lives. People, not only goods or not only money, are moving around the world in this globalized context. So all these questions you should ask yourselves. Don't hesitate to post articles, comments, or videos on the website if you find things that could be interesting to enlarge a little bit your view of globalization. See you in class. Bye.